if anybody would like to say anything, add anything, ask anything, please just unmute yourselves. Okay, so now where we are is that the tabernacle is now functional, and the cloud of glory is now hovering above the tabernacle. So we're good. And who are the primary functionaries? There's Aaron, who's been appointed high priest, and Aaron's sons, and then the future ones who were born. And he has 4 sons. Now, his sons, we find in Torah literature, are very lofty, very, very dedicated and saintly people, all 4. Now, what we didn't find expressly in the Torah, but what is we found kind of in the Torah's vague way, and we discussed years ago when we got there, was when the Torah talks about the Sinai experience, and it's in one Torah portion, and then it goes to it's wrapped up in a few Torah portions later. When the Torah wraps it up, it says something about people, youths seeing God. So at the very end of the Torah portion, Mishpatim. And the insinuation is that it was improper, but that nothing happened to them. And what we spoke about then, again, it wouldn't be in the bolded, it's not found in the Torah, is that 2 of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, when Moses was going back up the mountain, because there was this revelation to everyone, and then Moses says, "Hang on, I'm going up the mountain for 40 days, and I'm going to come back down with tablets. You stay here. I'm going up the mountain." Now, some people, not vigilante youngsters, some people out of their yearning for connecting God, they kind of went along with him. He didn't know that, and they made it up some of the way, and they got a glimpse of God's presence, which it came from a good place. They wanted to connect with God, but they didn't play by the rules. And the Torah there says is God didn't react to them. So now we're going to be reading about those same 2 sons, Nadav and Avihu, very spiritually accomplished and sensitive people, and something that happens with them, and it's not clear. So what I think the best thing for us is to read through first in the bolded, so you can see how the Torah frames it in a kind of a cryptic way. And then we'll go back, and in this Chumash, a beautiful thing is that they have the non-bolded. But with the non-bolded, it's taking a certain avenue of interpretation, and maybe we can expand that a little bit too. So at the bottom of 62, what it says, just the bolded, fire went forth from before God. Okay, so now it's the tabernacle is now functioning. Fire went forth from before God and consumed the scent offering and fats upon the altar, because we had said that they brought Aaron had brought the scent offering. All the people saw this, sang praises, and fell upon their faces. Okay, and then we're going to go to 63, down to like the 3rd paragraph. Again, we have the bolded. Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, those 2 that I mentioned, each took a pan, put fire in it, placed incense on it, and brought before God a fire that was foreign. What made it foreign? As much as he had not commanded them to do it. In response, fire went forth from before God, consumed them, another view, and they died before God. And then on page 64, we'll go to Moses speaking to Aaron after they've died. Okay, so what it says here is not much. It's saying that God, a heavenly, right? And then the view, each did something with incense, brought it before, off with it. It was an alien fire, foreign fire. And fire went to God, and they died. So what went on here? We do know, as I told you, and you're going to see yourselves, that in Moses and Aaron's opinion, and they had as great an opinion as ever existed on how to assess human character, these were people of very high caliber. But they did something that missed the mark. What was it? We say it was an alien fire. So some commentaries say, and exactly what it means, that they took fire from an oven rather than taking it from the altar, which is odd, you'd think, for people of high stature. They've been, marinating in the whole idea of the tabernacle and the offerings for months and months, and they're just starting this, and somehow something pretty basic is take the fire from there or not from there, but that is mentioned later on in the bolded. We'll see that pursuant to this, God says, make sure not to go to Kohens, to make sure not to do the service if they're intoxicated. Well, the juxtaposing of the two, commentaries will say, sometimes that must be that they drank wine before they went in. There too, there's nothing wrong with drinking wine. On one, there's a little bit. What were they thinking? Such a very special moment, and they have such a special this and that. Based on some nuances in the verses, there are commentaries who say they did not full Kohen garb. There was special garb, and they were some of they have 4 garments, but the high priest has 8 garments. They weren't totally garbed. There's a question there too. And some say that they swore off marriage or swore off propagating children because they saw themselves as they were so devoted to God, they didn't feel that this was something engaging in the physical relationships of marriage was not something that they felt that would be distracting them from their connectedness to God. Just giving you a smattering of the different opinions about what went on there. So whatever it was, they did something wrong. Great people did something wrong. And this fire comes out from God and zap, they're dead. So now let's take a look at this. Let's start now from the third reading. And start this with reading the non-bolded too. Fire went forth from heaven, descending from from before God and consumed the ascent offering and the fats upon the altar. All the people saw this, sang praises and fell upon their faces, prostrating themselves before God. Okay. Now, then that's what in the way it's broken up. That's the end of one chapter, and we begin a new chapter here. The death of Nadav and Avihu. What happened? So let's go bottom of 62 on the right. It has been recounted that Aaron's two eldest sons, Nadav and Avihu, had become liable to the death penalty at the giving of the Torah. Back then, we say they did something wrong, right? They snuck up and they took a glimpse of God. There's a reason they were told not to. They did it anyway. So commentators will say that really at that point, they've done something that's so really egregious and offensive in the sense that, you can't say you love God and then disobey God and say that this is what's called loving God, the idea of disobeying. So now, 10 months later, they became liable to the death penalty on two additional counts. First, they reasoned correctly that just as the revelation of the divine presence that accompanies the daily morning sacrifices followed by offering up incense, so should the revelation of the divine presence that had just been witnessed be followed by an incense offering as well. There was a very mystical and powerful service called the incense in the service of the temple and the tabernacle. Yolanda asked about that. We will tackle it. It's going to be somewhat addressed now, but not fully. But it is seen as a very, very powerful, perhaps the most powerful service in the temple and tabernacle. And since they looked and they said, and they wanted to do it. These are spiritually powerful people. Said, since the daily sacrifice has place for incense, they figure that now that God, the cloud just came down, we're in such a high-pitched place of connection to God. Now is the time for incense. They stayed alone and acted on it before giving Moses a chance to do so. 63. So they were impulsive, which is kind of what we think about the idea of going up the mountain. Spiritually impulsive. They felt it's worth it. They wanted to feel connection. They wanted to lock in holiness and to tap into holiness. So therefore, they did something, and they did it out of order. And therefore, here also they should have waited for Moses. Don't just decide that unless they've been instructed. Since Nadav and Avihu's spiritual stature was second only to that of Moses and Aaron. In other words, they were really great. So they should have certainly known not to preempt Moses in this way, and therefore they incurred the death penalty. Okay, so we're seeing it as a death penalty, which is very severe and obviously very strict. People of high spiritual caliber, their mistake also has more import. Another perspective. I told you there are multiple perspectives. Nadav and Avihu, these are ones brought by Rashi. These perspectives brought by Rashi. Nadav and Avihu sought to enhance the ecstasy of the moment by drinking wine. Why? In Hebrew state, they offer their instance. What does wine have to do with anything? We're just looking for a high. But inasmuch as performing sacrificial rites while drunk had not yet been forbidden, they didn't technically transgress any prohibition. Therefore, their incense did elicit a divine revelation. They did was not technically wrong. No one had yet told them that you couldn't drink and work in the Kohen duties in the temple. However, due to their exalted spiritual stature, they should have intuited that God does not want his priests to officiate while drunk. It was in this that their incense was an unauthorized fire that God had not commanded them to offer up. They thereby incurred the death penalty. Now, what they have done, and we'll get into the word say it here. that the whole idea is an idea that it's, in its very concrete sense, it's taking a bottle of bourbon and getting drunk. That's not what we're talking about here. Intoxicating is a raising of the spirit. Intoxication is a metaphor for getting lost in mysteries of the universe, in godly ideas, and detaching from one's normal way of thinking, being uplifted. So it's getting high, but in a holy way. The idea of, when we say the Kabbalah, are the secrets of the Torah, are called the wine of Torah. It's that idea of being able to get into the more intoxicating areas of Torah. Therefore, and that's why sometimes it's okay to say l'chaim, not to get drunk, but to loosen oneself up so that one can find spiritual intoxication. It's never the goal to find liquor intoxication. But the idea of saying l'chaim just to be able to relax and get past one's worries and get loosen up one's defenses, to be able to lose oneself in something higher, l'chaim, melody. That's something that's done. So let's look a little to finish off. I don't think we read for the third paragraph. Thus, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Avihu, each took a pan, put coals that were on fire in it, placed incense upon the fire, and thus brought before God into the Holy of Holies a fire that was foreign, unauthorized, as far as they were concerned, inasmuch as he had not commanded them to offer it up or offer it up in this way, although he had indeed commanded Moses to offer it up. Okay. So now these young men are dead. What does this mean? Is this here just for historical context? I wouldn't say it's a non sequitur, but certainly it's in the flow of the tabernacle, the newness of the tabernacle, connectedness with God, and the closeness of that one could achieve in the tabernacle and the temple, and this comes up. So let's take a look at this. Verse number 163. It says they were liable to the death penalty. From a deeper perspective, Aaron's sons did not sin, nor was their death a punishment. It was not only in full accordance with God's will that they offered up their incense before Moses commanded. It was a vital conclusion to the consecration rites. As a matter of fact, they did something right, but they hadn't been told to. How did they know how to do it then? The innate consciousness of our divine soul is its awareness of being bound to God, being one with Him. So each and every one of us, in our deep spiritual subconscious, feel at this moment totally one with godliness. That's the core of the soul. In the Hebrew name there's 5 levels of soul. The Hebrew name for the core of the soul is Yechida, which is actually a feminine word, and it means oneness. There's oneness with God. Now, you're sitting here, I don't think any of us are feeling that. Normally, this awareness is obfuscated by the self-awareness of our human or animal souls. Doesn't mean we're an animal, but it means we have a more natural soul. We have seen how drinking wine can, under the proper circumstances, allow the divine soul to overtake our consciousness. Sometimes we get uplifted. Sometimes we have holy moments. Sometimes we feel spiritual and we feel transcendent. The metaphor for that is wine, that we're brought higher, and sometimes even the wine, the l'chaim, can be even a tool in it. And that is what went on here. In the words of the Talmudic sages, when the wine enters, secrets emerge. Which secret? the ultimate secret being our unity with God, which is real, it's core, but it's not open. Wine is also a metaphor for the inner dimension of the Torah, the study of which also aids the divine soul in manifesting itself in our consciousness. Okay, so here, we all have this. We all have this core sense of connectedness, and we'd like to be able to bring it out. Aaron's sons want to bring it out. This is why Aaron's sons drank wine. Why did they drink wine? Not to get drunk. They said l'chaim in order to open their minds and reveal the divine souls. They're going into the tabernacle. They're lucky enough to be priests, Kohanes, doing the service. This is amazing for them. And now they're going to they want to be able to connect with God. So let's take a l'chaim. We're human. We want to be able to loosen up to really connect. At the same time, they drank wine literally. At the same time they drank wine literally, they also drank wine metaphorically, by allowing their divine souls to overtake their consciousness. Their minds became simultaneously flooded with profound insight into the Torah's inner dimension, increasing their sense of oneness with God. So they were successful. They were holy people in a holy setting. They took a l'chaim also because that helped them. And now the spiritual wine is flooding them. And they're feeling transcendent. And they're connecting with their deepest oneness with God. When this sense of oneness with God overtakes our conscious mind sufficiently, we gain an intuitive knowledge of God's will. At this level of consciousness, there's no need for God to articulate His commandments to us explicitly, since we already know what He wants of us. There is the idea of a person, a very spiritually advanced person, being so connected to God that becomes their nature. And that they instinctively go in the right direction, because their godliness is now the traffic controller of their lives. So now in the parentheses, there are advantages both in waiting to fulfill God's will until He expresses it, and intuiting His will before it is expressed, or fulfilling it beyond how it is expressed. So here, the parentheses wants to address something, is that's not up for us. That's not a normal thing. We go by rules, and it's actually correct and beautiful that our job is to do what God told us to. And for us to think that somehow we're smarter than the rules and we're connected with God, that's a dangerous path to follow. Say, this is what God wants of me. So even though people of high spiritual stature, if they have intuition, they can trust it. And you and I, if we have an intuition or a feeling to do something that's extra legal, that's not something for us to do, because we should just play by the rules. There is a place for this in the scheme of how humans can be connected to God. For most of us, it's really surrender to the rules and finding love and connectedness within those rules. And there is an idea of an inspiration which even doesn't violate the rules, but it's the idea of having the instinct of doing what God wants. So here, what he says is, on the one hand, submitting to God's express will evinces our devotion to it, our willingness to override our own agendas in favor of His. That's what Torah is about. We listen to the rules. And as a matter of fact, the sages teach us that one who performs a divine commandment, having been commanded to do so, is greater than one who performs such a deed, not having been commanded to do so. There are times we're not commanded to do something. We say, yeah, I want to do it anyway. Most of the time, that's okay. And you say, wow, so now I deserve a divine brownie button because my friend had the mitzvah to do it and did it, but I didn't have the mitzvah to do it. I did it anyway, my own volition. And there's beauty to that. What the Talmud says is no. The one who was commanded to do it is the one who has the real mitzvah. It's a commandment. And surrendering to a commandment is ultimately what Judaism is about, being able to put ourselves to the side and get ourselves in sync with what God wants of us. So in that sense, that's the whole beauty of what Nadav and Avihu did. That's not really that's not the norm. On the other hand, intuiting his will before it is expressed and or fulfilling it before we're required to, or even when we're not required to, evinces our identification with his will, the substitution of his agenda for ours. That it's the whole point, that a person has become so egoless that now godliness and the godliness of the soul has taken them over, so they have that intuition. The first is a greater sacrifice. The second is a greater achievement of divine consciousness. So there's an advantage in either. One reaches such incredible divine consciousness. You think about the Rebbe. Well, we don't know what he's assuming totally in with what God wants. So we're going to assume that he didn't have struggles about mitzvahs or about doing you because he was so totally connected. So on the one hand, we have told, at least on 2 occasions that I know, I said, I envy your sacrifice. Because that's what we have, because we have our instincts in different directions, and we do the right things. Sometimes we have to set aside our instincts. At the same time, the beauty of the divine consciousness that he accomplished and that he achieved is way beyond us. So there's 2 sides to this coin. For most of us, it's really about being able to adapt our physical lives to make sure that we're bringing godliness in. And that usually takes some sacrifice. Nadav and Avihu went to a different level, and they intuited something correct. Yet, that was problematic. Why? It was to this level of divine consciousness that Nadav and Avihu ascended on the 8th day of installation rites. That's how we started this Torah portion. It's the 8th day of installation rites. The installation rites went for 7 days, and then the opening day is the 8th day. Thus, the incense offering was that he had not commanded, for the intuitive necessity even before God disclosed it. So, on the one hand, it was spiritual elevation. On the other hand, they weren't going by the rules. Moreover, their incense offering was an expression of their conscious unification with God. Incense is about oneness with God. Let's look at that a little bit. Incense is offered up on the inner altar. There were 2 altars. There's the outer altar, where most of the offerings are brought, and there's the inner altar. Inner, it's not just spatial. One is more deeply whole, by the Holy of Holies. You couldn't bring the offerings there. It's only very special thing come to the inner altar. And in one of them, on the inner altar, which parallels the inner dimension of the heart, or the divine soul, which is constantly bound with the divine source. Sense represents that deep connectedness that we have with God that we're not even conscious of. It's constantly bound to its divine source. The word Torah itself, the Hebrew of it means bound, which serves to reveal and intensify this bond. In contrast, the sacrifices offered up on the outer altar are designed to elevate the outer dimension of the heart, our human and divine soul, to divinity. So the offerings were about me and you, who make it through the day And we have our struggles, and we have our struggles with being who we need to be, right? And we achieve, and then take one step back and take two steps forward. And the offerings addressed that reality and brought us together with God, and achieved the closeness. The offering means closeness, but that was addressing more the functional dimension of life. Thus, the Hebrew word for sacrifice, korban, means to come close, implying that the offerer is not yet close. It's us. And that through the sacrifice, he or she becomes close, but does not necessarily become one with God. In contrast, the Hebrew word for incense, ketoras, means bound, implying that through the incense, the offerer binds himself with his divine source, becoming one with it. So there's this very intimate, deep connectedness that we are able to effect through the ketoras. So Aaron's incense offering, therefore, completed the rites performed by Moses and Aaron and sanctified the tabernacle. When Aaron's sons, instance, they brought this, and they felt that this is, incorrectly so, this is what needed to top off what was going on with the consecration of the tabernacle. Because although the divine presence had already descended upon the tabernacle, they saw that the presence hadn't permeated the tabernacle. The tabernacle and the divine presence remain separate entities. This dichotomy mirrored the divine consciousness that Aaron had advanced in performing his rites. He had done all he was commanded, but had stopped short of ascending to the level where commandments became superfluous. So they saw in their father, and they saw expressed in the temple, this idea where we're servants, and we work here, and we play by the rules, and we obey the rules. But even if we know something that really will intensify and beautify our connectedness with the rule giver, do it, because I'm not the rule giver, I'm a soldier. And there's a lot of beauty to that, and that's the normal way of approaching Jewish life. They said, no, take a step up and stop being other. Recognize, let the goodness flow through you. That convince. And you don't want to bring the chorus of the incense yet because you haven't been told. Well, that's the whole point. You know it's coming. You know that it has to be done. And maybe that's what's for you to take your own initiative, take the step. Therefore, tabernacle sanctification, the achievement of oneness with God, required an alien fire, one that was different than any rite that had yet formed, by virtue of having created in some divine consciousness. So there's a lot to their methodology. Nadav and Avihu's incense satisfied this requirement, and therefore I listed it as a fire from God that surpassed the fire that descended through Aaron's sacrificial service, permeating the tabernacle with holiness rather than just manifesting holiness in it. So on the ground, they did something good. They hit it right. Bingo. We needed something to go beyond just what we were told, to intensify and show our own intensity of connection with God. We can do this through the incense. And when they did it, the fire came. The permeation happened. So everything here seems like these are heroes. Nadav and Avihu's elevated divine consciousness led them to lose all sense of their physicality, until their souls left their bodies. As Rabbi Chaim ben Attar explains, in their intense desire to cleave to God, they continued to rise to spiritual heights, even as they felt their souls leaving them. From this perspective, their death was not a punishment. They died in the same way that Moses and Aaron would later die by the divine kiss. So one of the great Sephardic Torah commentaries is known as the Orach Chaim ben Attar. And he writes a perspective which is very foundational in Hasidic and mystical ways of approaching the story, saying it's not that God sent a fire to zap them. They were so swept up in their own passion, in the oneness with God, like all Rabbi, there's just that their souls just left. They were longing for others, and to their souls, in the shallowness of the human condition, staying anchored to the body, just for this age. They wanted to embrace and be embraced by God. So their souls left them. Not that they got killed, but their souls, the fire of their souls, went up to God. So all of this seems to tell the story of two really wonderful paragons of intense spirituality in our history. And it does tell that story. Yeah, but here the way it's framed is that they did something wrong. So where does that come in? Nevertheless, their behavior was acceptable only as an ad hoc measure required for the purposes of that special day. Therefore, we are not intended to emulate their example. On the contrary, we are expressly forbidden to pursue such suicidal spiritual rapture. Although it is necessary to seek inspiration and renew it constantly, the purpose of reaching increasingly higher planes of divine consciousness is to bring the consciousness that we acquire down into the world, thereby making the world increasingly more conscious of God, transforming it into His home. There is what Nadav and Avihu did was not commanded. It was spiritually beautiful, but also spiritually awful. And I'll just try to explain it in my own words and we'll fit it in here. God created us as humans to lead holy human lives. God did not create us to become angels, to be angels, to be disembodied souls. God created us to be humans. And that takes the work of being a good human. The idea of taking time to feel our souls and to feel our God and to feel embraced by God is critical. It's critical for a purpose. It's critical that purpose is to energize us, to focus us, to give us spiritual juice to be able to tackle human life. Someone could and has, over history, people have seen spirituality as a way of escaping the pain of human life. I want to disengage. I want to live spiritually. I'm going to be a hermit. Whatever it may be, I'm going to just devote myself to God and disengage from the human condition. That is not Torah. Torah is about engaging in the human condition. How can you properly, morally, accurately engage the human condition? Through periodically tapping into the spirituality. That's why we pray 3 times a day. To shut down the world and connect with our souls and connect with our God. But prayer is not an escape. Prayer is a refresher course for what we're supposed to be doing when we're done with prayer. So we find in the Talmud that the Talmud talks about 4 great sages who threw themselves into the secrets of the Torah. Rabbi Akiva and 3 other sages. I can give you the names that they wouldn't be familiar to. And it says that they went into the orchard. The orchard is a metaphor for the depths of the Torah. And it says one of them died. One of them went crazy. One of them became a heretic. And Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and left in peace. So we see about those 3 who died. See, similar to what happened with Nadav and Avihu. See, the one who died, the one who died, the three who didn't react constructively, is one died because his soul just left him out of this great yearning for, he had a taste of the oneness of God who needs human life. One of them didn't die, but it totally disabled his normal human function. He wasn't able to recover. One of them was so thrown off balance by the intensity of the oneness with God, and then having to bring back into this world, he just, I want no part of this. And Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and left in peace. And the Rebbe once asked, what do you mean he entered in peace and left in peace? They all entered in peace. All four were okay and alive before they entered. It's just Rabbi Akiva was the only one who exited, connected, breathing, and inspired. The says the Talmud, using that language, if he entered left in peace, is underscoring to us that the reason he left in peace was because he entered in peace. When he delved into this deeply spiritual exercise, it was not about satisfying a spiritual appetite he had. It was not about escaping a shallow world. He was firmly aware that his purpose in life was to be a wholly functional human being. And all he wanted was to be able to connect even more with God so that he could be a better, wholly functional human being. There was no escape. There was no personal pursuit. It was about tapping into the spiritual juice for a purpose, tapping into spiritual juice, not period, but comma, to be able to be the human being God created him to be. So, and we're going to pursue this more next week. Nadav and Avihu represent being overtaken by holy passion, but without keeping the goal in mind. It's not just about connecting with God in your heart. It's about connecting with God through your actions. And your actions, you're not going to be able to be sitting in meditation all day. When you connect with God in the way you speak to your neighbor, in the way you speak to your client, your delivery person, whatever it is, doing that properly, morally, how the Torah wants to do, that's called connecting with God. And to another view, or an emblem of defining connecting with God as just embracing the divine. It's all meditation, spiritual surge. It's not the way it's supposed to work. So while they are deeply, deeply respected for their spiritual caliber and their connectedness with God, and even their death was a natural death where their souls left them, we're going to find that from the way the Torah is framing this, we're told, don't try this at home. This is not, ultimately, this is not Torah. It's inspiring of how high we can reach in spiritual connectedness, but it has to be for a purpose. So I'm going to leave it here. Questions, we'll talk about it. Not, there's plenty to talk on this topic.
Rabbi,
Yes, ma'am.
can you hear me?
I can.
So the question, if there's time for a question, what I think about, and what you said about there's the way you speak to your spouse, to your friends, to everybody reflects your connection with God. I'm thinking about how often Israel or the nation of Israel and God, or the Jews and God are likened to like a spousal relationship. And like, I guess that, are we the bride? I don't know who's the bride, but we're the bride. Okay, so well, whether we're the bride or the groom, that you have to have a certain kind of ear for your spouse. like that it's not about you,
Yes.
it's about them. And I wonder if, in addition to all the other things, that that this example raises, if it's also about that, meaning, I guess you can, want to do many things, but that you have to realize that there is the other, and you have to be respectful of the limits. You can't just take. I don't know. What do you think?
I think, well, I think that that's all truths. In here, I would probably see this more as, if a spouse says, I'd like to go to take what we're doing only to a certain point, and so the other spouse says, but I love you so much, I'm going to go past that. It's great that you love so much, but that's not what this is about. You have to also surrender to what the other wants.
So I guess there was like selfishness going on here.
There's no question that I didn't want to use that word because it's not the view, but yeah, it's they did not totally surrender to the objective, and that's why it's not considered the as holy as they were. It's not considered the way to go.
Okay.
Can I ask
Thank
a
you, Rabbi.
question? Oh, I'm
Sure.
sorry, Donna. I didn't know.
No,
Are you?
I'm done.
So hypothetically speaking, had they not brought this incense, then Hashem would have revealed the necessity for it, and perhaps Aaron or Moses would have brought it instead. Do we have any indication about what would have transpired had they not preempted this?
There's, I guess, indication or speculation that it would have been the mitzvah, and you're right, it would have gone to Aaron, conceivably.
So it would have been done
Right.
in a matter of moments, perhaps, but they preempted not only God's revelation, but also their father's right, if you will.
I think that that's fair to say. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's part of the problem, I guess.
Yeah, I just, okay, thank you.
But somehow we're not supposed to look at this as a punishment for them.
It certainly seems to be punishment, but the way the Rabbi Ben says it was like a natural consequence. But we do know they did something off. So even if they weren't punished per se, and we do say that this is, there's certainly the opinions to say this is just really, it was the last straw after what they did on the mountain 10 months before. So there's enough room to say there was a punishment element to it.
Well, can I have one last question? If this was not necessarily a punishment for them, because, how could you call going up to God a punishment? It certainly was a punishment for Aaron and possibly Moses.
Right, we're gonna get into that, and Aaron's, how losing his kids is a big problem. It's gonna come up soon.
And possibly Moses, because wasn't he also very, very close to them? Wasn't he there too?
He was their uncle, and their mentor. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll come up on that.
Can I ask one more quick question about that? So God gave them this divine inspiration. One can assume, or should one assume, that Moses and Aaron had not simultaneously gotten this? That in fact, that the two sons got it in advance, even momentarily, of Moses and Aaron?
Yep, it does seem that way.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting to me.
Yeah, good point.
Well, they couldn't have done anything that bad because Olivia has friends in Israel named Nadav. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
All right. Have a great week.
Thank you very much.
Well,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.